Welcome, everyone. Thank you for coming. I'm going to turn you over to Frank, the director of the Segal Theater, to lead us off.
So first of all, thank you all for coming and taking time out of your busy lives. And it's snowing on top of it in New York already. It is an adventure to get anywhere. But thank you for coming. And of course, I would like to welcome, our writers who came from the Caribbean Sea. It took a very long journey. And so it's a very important program to us. The Segal Center bridges academia and professional theater, international and American theater. And our mission really is to connect, I think, New York City, which on one way is very global, and so many people, so many languages are spoken. On the other hand, it's sometimes a little bit local. It's not as open and a variety on stages and languages and stories we see that reflect of the people who really are in the city. Over 50% in the New York City are not white people. We actually, things have dramatically changed. It's not reflected on the stages. So we try to do things that no one else does. And this is one of the things what we do here for the 2 days, and we're extremely proud to do that, but we also think it is of real importance. Edouard Glesson was a scholar here at the Graduate Center, a very significant a member of the GC community, and his influence, his thinking, his writing is monumental. Unfortunately, I never met him, but I think it's also in his spirit and the ideas of the archipelagos, of the Creole, of to fight against the failure of imagination. What he said, lots of problems we have as people cannot imagine a different world. Plays, theater, and the stories we hear help us to imagine a different world, to make us comfortable with the future, or what already has happened because we are late. We just haven't realized how the world already is. Artists do see what's happening, but often also do look in the future and are a bit ahead, and they share with us what they see. This is what we do. And that region of the Caribbean is significant for us. We have done many programs with Haiti after the earthquake, others with the Judith Miller, who's with us here, knows that. She helped us translate so many plays and works. We did Jose Plia was here often, and many writers, especially I think from Haiti. So we have a strong connection. We feel it's of significance, and also the Francophone world is of real significance for us. We have many French writers, but of course the French-speaking Caribbean is such a significant, beautiful, and part of the world with something to say. And perhaps we are not listening hard enough often, to what we do. We do here a big program. It's called Penn World Voices, plays from around the world. So we really have a history of intense engagement with work for the stage, the written word also for the stage. And so for us to have those three countries, to have us all here is fantastic. I would like to thank Stephanie for coming with us with the idea. She said, Frank, it's about time. We have to do something about this. I'm working on this. Is this a possibility? And she has come to us before where we worked, on programs. And of course, we said this is something we would like to do. And we would like to thank the French Cultural Services, Nicole, who is really a great worker in the vineyard of international theater, a little bit hidden sometimes in the shadows, or you don't see what she does, but she has made so many things possible, also this one. So we would like to thank your personal engagement, really, as a person, but also, of course, for your institution. And people always think it's about institutions. In a way, it's true, but really it is about the people who are in the institutions. And you know that. Someone leaves someplace and it changes. So, Nicole, really thank you so much. And also the Siyaj company, and who was there from the very, very beginning. And so I would like to thank our advisory board, Michael, who is up there, who did brilliant work to give this in his function as the managing director of the Segal Center, as well as May Adra, who is coordinating this event. And then we had an addition, a little bit late. We worked for a year and a half, almost 2 years on this project to make this happen. And then Candace came on board. And really, we thought it would be important, but we had no idea what really it was important until she came. And so really, we're lucky to have you with us. And so that's a big asset. And we have learned a lot. I hope also for your world, it is as meaningful what you did as a dramaturg, but also to put everything together. So I really would like to say in the name of the Graduate Center, CUNY, but also the Segal Center and our PhD program, which is also a support of this. Thank you. And I'll let everybody else speak a bit more about the project, but I really would like you all to know that even though we are in a small community here, in the small churches, you know, which we believe in, and we say a small church in Finland might be closer to the gods than the big golden domes in Petersburg, and the same is true for theater. They are the big golden houses, and they are full, but they're also the small ones, but they're influential, they're significant, and some people do come, so really thank you all for coming and taking your time, and it's a true honor for us at the Segal Center to open this a day, and thanks also for Judas again for coming here, and Andre Zachery is here, great choreographer, and so many others, so thank you, but especially to the playwrights. But I now hand over the microphone to you. My last technical announcement is, if you have a cell phone, take it out, and let's see, it should be on off. And Stéphanie.
Merci. Ça marche? So my name is Stéphanie Bérard, and I'm the curator of the ACT project. It is a very big pleasure for me to be here today with you and to see the fulfillment of the project ACT, Action Caribéennes Théâtrales, Caribbean Theatre Project, that was born more than 2 years ago when we sat down with Elvia Gutierrez, co-director of the Siyaj company, sipping a glass of rum at sunset, or walking on a black sand beach of Trois-Rivières in Guadeloupe at sunrise. I cannot remember if it was morning or evening. But anyway, we had this question, how to make Caribbean theater travel outside the insular perimeter, how to connect it with neighboring islands and with the Americas, how to shift the past colonial East-West relationship and establish a present North-South axis, how to foresee a new emancipated relationship that will connect the Caribbean with the Americas, with the whole new world, that shares a common historical legacy, that of colonialism and slavery, that of the encounter of multiple cultures, races, languages, that of créolisation, to quote Edouard Glissant, that of the two mondes. That was my goal, my wish, my dream, when I started to conceive this project with Elvia. The key to open the doors of the insular world would be languages. Translating the plays in other languages to allow them to travel and be heard, staged outside of their native islands. Having Francophone and Creolophone plays translated in English would give the text and their authors a visibility in North America, not only in North America, but also in the whole Anglophone world. That would also enable Caribbean dramatists to share, exchange their perspective with their American counterparts and open up a dialogue with an American audience to see how their plays are perceived and received outside the Caribbean. When I came with that proposal to have Caribbean plays translated in English and stage read at the Martin Segal Theatre about more than 2 years ago, Frank Hentschker immediately jumped on board and has been since then a tremendous, inspiring collaborator. Thank you, Frank, for inviting us in your theatre. Frank mentioned Nicole Birmann and Laurent Clavel from the Cultural Services at the French Embassy, who also accepted right away to join the team. Without Nicole and her incredible professional network, but also her invaluable commitment and sense of organization and pragmatism, that project would not have been possible. So I want to thank all of you here. We created an advisory board, 8 people that I want to acknowledge. They are on the program. I cannot name all of them, but some of them are here with us today. Amin Erfari, who is over here, and Christian Flo, who will come from Buffalo, who selected 6 plays from, so 8 people who selected 6 plays from Martinique, Guadeloupe, and Haiti, respecting a gender balance, allowing new dramatic voices to emerge, and especially women voices, as well as evaluating what plays may resonate and impact the American world, the American society. These 6 plays have been translated by talented translators and will be stage read today and tomorrow by American directors and actors, who will have the delicate task to give flesh and blood to the characters through the stage reading coordinated by Candace Thompson-Zachery, our dedicated external artistic advisor, and thanks a lot, Candace, to be here. When Frank said we need a dramaturg, I was just, are you sure? And now I see that he was right. We need a dramaturg, and you were an exceptional one. Thank you. ACT is, as you see, a huge collaborative project that gathered, I don't know, 30, 40 people to make the dream come true and build bridges between artists, languages, culture, thanks to theater. I want to thank all of these people who are part of the project and tell them how grateful I am to work with so talented and committed people. I'm now anxious to hear, to see, to taste, and savor the fruits of a very long harvest. But before we move on, I acknowledge also the FACE Foundation in New York and Contexto Network in Paris for their precious support that made this project possible. And of course, all the Caribbean dramatists who are here with us today, and the ones also who could not come to New York. Guy Régis Jr. from Haiti, who is the director of the Quatre Chemins Festival that takes place right now, has to be in Haiti. Jean-René Lemoine, Haitian living in Paris, is currently in France because he has a production. And Gaël Octavia was just part of a big literary festival in the Caribbean and couldn't go to New York, you know, and escape from her work and her family to be here today and tomorrow, but we'll have a virtual presence. You'll see how. But we have, you know, 4 of them today with us. Luc Saint-Éloi, who is here. Charlotte Boimard and Magali Soligna, the authors of The Day My Father Killed Me. Luc is the author of Street Sad. And Danieli Francisque, who is the author of She-Devil. So they will be able to participate, of course, hear their work in English and see how it resonates in another language on a neighboring land, and to enter in dialogue with you. So thanks for being here today. I know it's not easy to come, especially with a not a rainy day, but a snowy day. So thanks a lot for being here. Thank you. I pass it to Nicole.
I'm going to use this one. Good afternoon. Thank you for being here today. As we said, it was a great adventure so far, and I think it's the beginning of a very long adventure for many of the playwrights that have been involved in the project. So I work for the cultural services of the French Embassy here in New York. We promote artists from France or artists who are based in France. It doesn't mean that they are French, and as well as artists from the Francophone countries, and in fact, artists from the African continent. We promote their work here in the United States and in the field of the performing arts, which is the field I'm working for. In the specific field of playwrights and contemporary writing, we start very at the beginning with the translation of work. So this is phase 1 of this long adventure, starting with these playwrights that gather emerging as well as established playwrights from Haiti, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. And I won't say more. You're going to hear the word. I'm very happy to work with the team here, and Candace and Stéphanie and Frank and all the people who are involved in the project. My work after will be to keep on working with the playwrights and presenters, American presenters, of course, scholars, to make sure that the work circulate, and one day maybe 1-2 productions here in the States. That's the work I do. Wish me good luck. And here is Candace.
Elvia.
Oh, Elvia, sorry.
Okay. Well, good afternoon. Good afternoon again. Okay. My name is Elvia Gutierrez, and I co-direct the Caribbean Theater Company Siyaj, together with Gilbert Lemort, who cannot be here today as he's currently in Montreal. Allow me to tell you a few words about our company. Siyaj is anchored geographically in Guadeloupe, and the theater we produce is deeply rooted in Caribbean oral tradition, drum music, and dance, while remaining open to regions of the world where we might find affinity with our traditions and culture. Such was the case of our latest Guadeloupe, Korea production, the play Le Sac de Lita. Rewriting the colonial legacy and interconnecting the different Caribbean zones while enhancing our cultural specificity is our goal. We work at connecting Caribbean theater with new audiences through multiple projects that include subtitled theater performances, educational workshops, bilingual anthologies of Francophone Caribbean theater translated in Spanish and English. The Project Act is part of this opening to the world, this interconnecting path that leads us today in New York after several years of work. I saw ACT be born, develop wings, and then take off with Stéphanie Bérard. Well, that is a poetic vision. We know how much work it requires to achieve events of this caliber. And we also know how many committed people it takes. It is remarkable how Nicole Birmann from the French Embassy opened so many doors everywhere for this project. She simply seems to be in possession of the master key to all the relevant places. I also want to acknowledge the tremendous contribution of Frank Hentschker and all his staff in every aspect of this project, not only the logistics, but also the conception and the human dimension. And our hope is that ACT opens up a dialogue between the US and the Caribbean, not only today and tomorrow, but in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'll introduce myself. I'm Candace Thompson-Zachery. I'm a choreographer and cultural producer here in New York. I'm originally from Trinidad and Tobago, but I've been working in the US for about 14 years, and I've been instrumental in presenting and supporting Caribbean dance in New York City. And you know, what I really saw in this project was a chance for Caribbean and Caribbean American performers, theater makers, producers, to have a dialogue that would not otherwise be possible. So the French Caribbean also being separated by the language barrier and by distance, having them come here, having the works be translated, and it was important to me that Caribbean American and Caribbean people in the field of arts and culture would have a connection to what was happening and would be able to be in dialogue with what was going on with this project. So for me, the most important thing was creating those bridges, creating those conversations, and making sure that the playwrights were received and that the work really landed in New York, but also landed in the Caribbean American community here in New York. So creating that bridge was really my way of contributing to the project and making sure that it landed here and that it was able to make an impact. So. I think that's all that we have for the panel. I want to just invite us to give them another round of applause for all of the work that they've done in putting this together. And I'm going to transition into our first event, which is a roundtable discussion on women and in Caribbean theater. So I'm going to invite our producers and presenters to switch spots with our panelists, who I'll invite to the stage. We have Amina Henry. We have Magali Coleman Christopher, I have Romola Lucas, and Daniele Francisque, who is whose work you'll see tomorrow. So, and just a bit about how today will run. So we have this panel that's going to happen now for about an hour. We'll take a short break. At 4 o'clock, we'll have our first stage reading, which is Street Sad by Luc Saint-Éloi. That's directed by Paul Price. Another stage reading at 6 p.m. and another one at 8 p.m. So I'm really happy that this conversation gets to sort of inaugurate the event, and especially kind of grounding the work that we'll see in the voices of women, and in the work that women produce in this field. We already talked about no cell phones on. I'm letting you know that we are live streaming, so say hello to the world. Yes. So yeah, let's transition into our panel on women and in Caribbean theater. I think being charged with putting this together, like I was saying before, I really wanted to bring women practitioners who were from possibly different Caribbean backgrounds, either from the Caribbean or related to the Caribbean through identity or through heritage, and allowing their individual stories and their individual perspectives to be the thing that was named in the room and that was brought to everyone's attention and put in place next to the other perspectives that are possible and that exist, so that they can, we can see them side by side, they can talk to each other, and that similarities or differences could be made visible. And especially in receiving the work, especially of Daniele, whose work will be seen, it's a chance for you and the other playwrights that are here to see what your colleagues across the ocean are doing, right? So, and a chance for us here to see how the kind of stories that we're telling in New York about the Caribbean and how we're expressing Caribbean identity, how those relate to what people in the region are doing. So that was my main concern, my main goal with putting this together. So I think we'll start with you, Daniele, if that's okay. Yes, everyone should grab a mic. Can you share with us a bit about your view on the role of women in Caribbean society, and then how you take up those issues in your work?
Thank you.
Good evening. Okay. I'm very, very happy to be here, and a little shy to be to come for a tiny island and arrive here in a huge country like United States. And it's my second time here in United States. My first time was this year in March in Miami, where I could present another playwright with Vanessa, who is here, who invited me in Miami. I can tell you about my vision, my own vision about women in Caribbean, in French Caribbean and Martinique Caribbean island. What people say in our common imagination is that women are a poteau-mitan. A poteau-mitan is a Creole expression to say that women are very central in their family, and that comes from, I think, from slavery or colonial period, and women are very important in their family, but in society, that is my vision. We live in the very macho society, where women don't really have the power, politic or economic power. They don't really have it, and they have a lot evaluated. They are changed since the 30, 40 last years. They are changed a lot, and they are doing, for me, a sort of revolution. For me. And what I observe are special issues that I observe is a sort of violence towards women, resistance of that women, that always fight to get more, to get emancipated, or not or everyone. And that violence is directed to the body of the woman and their power. And that's to explain you, I was born in Martinique and I grown up in Paris, in Paris suburbs. So and I get back to Martinique to install in Martinique 15 years ago. So I lived in the country, but also I have a vision, a different vision that women who raised there. And when I came back in Martinique, that was shocking me that there were a lot of men who killed their women. I found that very shocking for me. And I was thinking a lot about that. Why this violence towards women and to women's body? And that issue interests me particularly because myself, I lived violence from my father. And this issue is very important for me. And and then in my work, I excuse my English, but I do my best. It's good? Okay. So, in my work, I'm very interested in this issue, the violence issue, and women power also. And that's because I raised in Paris, and I was a lot asking myself about my origins. Why was I French but black but not really French? Because the other French told me that you're not really French, and when I was back in Martinique they told me that you're not really Martinican, and I was between two cultures like that, and who I am, and that is the first question who directed me to theater, because in theater I was able to think about that and write about that and tell about that. And the first play that I wrote was a play about slavery, because I discovered this story in university. I was 19 when I really discovered about slavery history, because in France, at that time, we didn't talk at all about slavery. And it was very important for me to discover that, because it was the central question of my identity and to understand why I became French. But why I'm not really French like the others. And then this was my first playwright. I didn't really know theater, but I wanted to, how you say that? Scream. I wanted to scream about who I am. And that's how I wrote my first playwright, whose name is in Creole, Neg Pakamo, whose means nigger never die, Negro never die. That comes from a poem I discovered from a Martinican poet. And in that playwright, I was in that play. Oui, d'accord. In that play, I was explaining or showing how we came in, how we became slaves, and how things was happening on the plantations. Plantations. And I was very, and then I was directed for the first time by Luc Saint-Éloi, who's the man who teached me theater. The first time I went on the stage is with him, and I'm very, very happy for that. Thank you. It gives a way for my life, a sense to my life. And I was very interested in that play about women rape, because I was telling me that, in fact, we are children of rape, women rape, a rape between Africa and Europe, and this is us. And so I discovered, it was very important for me. And the second play, name is Hurricane. Hurricanes. I took about 15 years to write that. It was very long, but it was important for me. It was talking about incest. Incest, because I lived incest, and I was really, it was a big issue for me, why things like that can happen. And I was, and I wrote a play about that. And because we live also in a society where silence and the power, the man power, the father power is important. And I was wondering, how can you live after that? How can you resist to a silence crime? You can talk about that. And this silence is important for me, like in the slavery history, because this was silent too. The silence is very, very, very big issue. And where there is silence, I want to write words.
Danielle, so if I may, it seems like basically theater for you was your way of exploring your identity, but also exploring all of these issues that women face in society that they can't talk about, and this dichotomy between how much power they have in certain aspects and how much power they don't have in other ways. And the power, and basically theater was your way of maybe implementing change or starting change or starting to change what those narratives were like.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Does anyone want to respond to any, she said a lot. Does anyone want to respond to any of the points that she brought up?
I think it's essential for theater to take its role in society as the promoter of change. And your work is emblematic of that, the importance of that. As a producer, as a writer, I am passionate about arts and social change. And if you look at the heritage of theater among people of the diaspora, our plays are about change, about keeping the stories alive, and about change. And so you're keeping the heritage alive. That's my input.
So I'll see. Okay. So I'm the one non-theater person here. So my experience is in film. And I would say, you mentioned providing a space for us to have a conversation, even across Anglo, Francophone, Caribbean, but film and theater. So I'm from Guyana, and interestingly, the #1 killer of women in Guyana is men. It's domestic violence. So this is something that we're struggling with as well. And women, as you said, in the family, they're it. In society, they're made to feel less than who they are all the time. And I wouldn't say that I'm a filmmaker myself, but I do curate films for various reasons. And in curating, I get the chance to see the types of stories filmmakers are telling about women and their role in society. And one thing I can say about filmmakers from the Caribbean is that the types of films, the types of stories that they choose to tell are kind of like what it's really like to live in the Caribbean, because images of the Caribbean that are projected to the world, white sand, blue waters, glorious people smiling and having an amazing time. And it is that. It is that. But that's not all that it is. And filmmakers and playwrights, I think, that have come out to the Caribbean have like really walked on the darker side of what it means to be Caribbean, and the stories that they tell like really they choose to tell stories that really highlight violence against women, violence against children, just what the underbelly of all those years of colonialism has left.
Basically, all the things we don't want to talk about, we don't want to say out loud.
That silence. Yes.
Well, Molly, let's switch over to film since we're there. So maybe talk a little bit about what kind of interest women filmmakers in particular that you've seen, the kind of issues that they're taking up, and then possibly also what is the experience of women playwrights and women filmmakers. I mean, and you're a female curator, like, what are those experiences like, trying to get some of these stories to screens and stages?
Well, there's an interesting thing happening in the English-speaking Caribbean, and I'm not an expert on this, so this is from my experience. Starting from I would say from an institutional level, most, if not all, of the film festivals are run by women in the Caribbean. All the ones that I can think about are run by women, and the film commissioners, the few places that have film commissioners, they're women. Wow. So, no. So I think that there isn't, or from my experience, there is not an issue of representation or lack of representation of women in the field on that level. Yeah. Then you come down to the actual the filmmakers, the directors, and the cinematographers and the editors and all of those. So that's where there's more nuanced, or there's more variation in terms of representation of women. There are a lot more, for example, women directors. There are very few women cinematographers, very few, and the ones that are there are in high demand, because women want women to work with to tell their stories. It's just this little community that they're building. And then with editors, even editors are few. Like women editors are also, from what I've seen, there are not that many of them. And then when women start to tell stories, the ones who are directors, the stories are usually very personal, and speak to they're either very personal, or they speak to or they speak to children. Maybe they're teaching something, or maybe they're telling stories from a child, like involving the perspective of a child, because they connect. Even if they don't have children, it doesn't matter. It's like those are the types of stories that they tell, like stories that are heartwarming to children, or maybe not. And also stories that represent their personal journeys in life. So they're very specific in a lot of instances. There are some women who make films that are more, speak to a broader audience and are kind of commercial, but they're in the minority. It's mostly like women use film as a process. Like literally, they're telling stories of a journey, and they're living at the time that they're telling the story.
Yeah.
Is that Caribbean women or Caribbean and American women, or both?
Both.
I mean, and it seems like a similar thing to what you expressed, Daniele, like using the process of making theater as a way to sort of like work through some of your own demons and work through some of the demons that we're facing in society. Yeah. Amina, you want to jump in?
About facing my own
demons? Sure, if you would like.
I mean, I think that's true. I was thinking about what you said, and I think that my work has become more and more personal the longer I have been a writer. I don't know that my writing was particularly, I mean, all of my plays are about me on a certain level, but I think I'm more consciously attempting to kind of discover who I am, if you will, the longer I'm writing, and sort of unpeeling that onion, if you will, as a Jamaican American writer, and what that means. Because I feel like in the past several years, I've tried to write plays that are really about being Jamaican, and in fact, they're actually very American plays. So I've been interested in exploring that particular aspect of my identity.
Yeah, I mean, there is, a difference, I guess, in the kind of work that someone who is living and working and born in the Caribbean might make, and issues that someone who's Caribbean American might make. I don't know if those resonate with the kind of work that you do, like that difference or that dichotomy.
I think it goes to a question of audience, because I know that I'm actually not, generally speaking, if my plays are produced or if I'm producing my play, I'm not speaking to a Caribbean audience. I'm speaking to a very American audience. And so I'm very careful about what I choose to represent. I don't know that this is true of other Caribbean nations, but I know in my experience growing up, whenever there was anything vaguely Jamaican happening, it was a joke. Like everybody laughed, like it was comic relief, it was supposed to be funny. And so I've been trying not to do that and have it, and to present people who are actually people as opposed to kind of stereotypes of what you think of when you think of a Jamaican person.
And it's addressing that issue of how we're represented in theater and film that inspired me to found Conch Shell Productions. My company, we produce works written by Caribbean Americans, which is a challenge because every time the word Caribbean comes out, they think I'm talking about Caribbean writers. But I'm talking about Jamaicans, Haitians, Trinis, Guyanese, Martiniquais, people from Guadeloupe who live here. Their parents came here to give them opportunities. And yet, living here, they're not quite American. And when they go back home, they're not quite from Martinique, not quite from Guadeloupe. They're not quite from anywhere. So what is their story? And the honest portrayal of who these human beings are and who their family is what I'm looking for writers to put on the paper. And I've discovered that audiences care. And they're not segmenting you, or you're a Caribbean writer, you're an American writer, you're a Guyanese American writer, you are a Trini American writer, you're telling this unique Jamaican American story, or this unique Puerto Rican American story, or you're an American and your parents came from Puerto Rico 2 generations ago, and yet your perspective of the American experience is affected by your upbringing and your heritage. And it's as an artist, as a writer, and an actor, I'm primarily a professional actor, I didn't feel welcome to express that, and yet I was raised to express that. So I did, and it took years of overcoming the fear of rejection for me to say, I'm just gonna tell my story. And if you don't think it's American enough, somebody else will. And it was my experience going to Great Britain and seeing the work of writers like Winsome Panoke, where she's writing about the British Jamaican. And these women, some of them speak with British accents, some of them speak with Jamaican accent, and they live in London. And I was like, you think like me? Oh my God. So it's seeing these women declaring, I am of 2 places, and my stories will be about people like me, that made me think I'm not crazy by feeling that my story means something. And so this is a platform for people who are looking for an opportunity to say, I am hyphenated, and you're going to see it in my work.
Thank you for sharing that. And you produce Hear Her Call, Caribbean American Women's Theater Festival. Why do you single out the voices of women in that identity?
We're a new company. We were founded in 2018. And I couldn't imagine having a company that didn't showcase the voice of the female writer. that's implausible to me. We are silenced by other groups. I am showcasing women. And I feel blessed by the opportunity to show how we process the world via theatrical works. And last year was this year, we're still in 2019. We had our first event this year, and we had 6 amazing short plays by 6 amazing, completely different women. A Haitian American writer, Dominican American writer, Puerto Rican American writer, no, Cuban, okay, Cuban American writer, Trini American writer, and Jamaican American writer. Amazing pieces. And the audience was thrilled. And I knew I was starting something great. And this year we're expanding we had a 1-day festival last year, and this year it's gonna be 4 days at York College in Jamaica, Queens. And I put out our submission yesterday because it was December 1st, and a call for submissions to get these voices out there. And we also do a festival for men and women. It's the reading series that we're producing. It's all about money, quite frankly. You know, it's all about starting somewhere. And we're gonna go far because the audiences are hungry and the artists are feeling empowered. And yeah, that's why. I'm a woman, I'm gonna showcase women first and foremost.
I was going to say, I do think that there's a way in which, yes, others have silenced women, but when I think of Caribbean women, or I think of Jamaican women and women in my own family, I think there's an element of, I know for me, that I've had to learn not to silence myself, because I feel like the way I was raised, if there's a man in the room, you're just kind of feeding them and kind of like, kind of like taking care of them, because that's how you were raised to be. Even if you're a feminist, even if you're a very woke person, I find that I slip into this weird, did everybody eat kind of thing? Like if like a man is in the room, and it's just because of the way I was raised and how I was taught. And I don't know that that's even necessarily a positive thing, because I do think that I have a tendency to kind of dim myself in order for the men in the room to shine a little bit, which, again, I don't know if this is a Jamaican thing or if this is just the women in my in my particular family. But it's interesting to me that when I was growing up, I didn't have any particular Jamaican role models, really, in terms of literature. At all. And I don't know that I even had any Caribbean role models in terms of literature. And that's something that as I get older, as I write more, I feel that I would like to be a role model for a younger Caribbean American child. Like, oh, actually, look at this woman and she's doing this thing that I could also do. I mean, I don't think I read, I've read very few Jamaican playwrights. When I got to college, I read Michelle Cliff, who's a Jamaican was a Jamaican novelist, and that actually changed my life, because I thought, oh my gosh, look, there's this woman who's writing this book, and she's Jamaican, and it's set in Jamaica, and how amazing. And it was such a breath of fresh air for me to not just be dealing with the Black experience, which is significant and important, but actually a very specific Jamaican experience, which is slightly different. And that's something that I've been excavating in my work quite a lot over the past several years, because being Black growing up in America is a very specific thing, and at least in the 80s, you weren't really allowed to. I'm Black and actually, like I'm not just Black, I have other things going on, and so, and being a Jamaican American Black person is actually different than being a Black American Black person, and that's something it's taken me up until now really to accept, and not try to write plays for Black people in the hopes that they will like what I write. Because everybody's different. It's like, who knows what people are coming into the room with. But that's taken a long time of me being comfortable enough to be like, I'm just going to write about my experience, and I'm a black person, and I'm a black woman, and actually that's enough to just say that, no matter what the play is about.
You said that you would like to be a role model for, like, I guess, other Caribbean American future playwrights or theater makers. What would you want to model for them? Like, what did you think was missing in your experience?
I think being brave enough to write about, I mean, again, like, my plays are not necessarily about my family and about my life necessarily, but being brave enough to write about yourself if you want to, and know that your story, as specific as it is also universal. People will still enjoy it. It's not just about, this is what it is to be a Jamaican. That's actually, it's just, no, this is my reality, and I'm going to tell it and trust that other people will be there to receive it. Because I certainly thought that a lot of stories that actually are not universal were, but actually it was like Anne of Green Gables or whatever. Like, that's a very specific story. It's not, oh, this is for everyone. Your plays can be for everyone too.
Being comfortable with, I guess, like, declaring that difference, but knowing that that difference is also in a way universal, because we all have these individual perspectives.
Right, and not feeling like you have to apologize for
that difference,
where you come from.
Yeah. Other people want
I
to
don't think it's a
respond to that?
difference, it's a specificity. Because when you use the word different, it seems to negate the beauty. Specificity is what gives us our humanity. We can't be a blob of people. No one is a blob. We're each unique beings, and our unique stories don't belong under a label that is defined by pigmentation.
Other people want to respond?
It makes me think about to be black in France. But yes, because here what I see that is that you have the right to be specific. You're different. But in France, in fact, you don't really have, it's difficult to be different in France, in fact. It's difficult to be black and French in France. In fact, this is my view, but in fact, when you're French, you have to be unique. In fact, you don't have to be specific. The specificity is not recognized, and it is méprisé, despised, in fact. So we are still struggle to say that, yes, we are French, but we are different. We have a specific story, we have a specific vision of world, and we have specific things to say. And generally, in French commissions or French production, when we don't really have a French national representativity. Is it okay? We don't see ourselves on French screens. We don't see ourselves on French stages of theater. And we are systematically like that on the side. We are French, but on the side. And don't scream too loud. Just don't be specific. So be French. There are one way to be French, and this is the way to be French. And we always like that to. We don't feel very welcomed. We are specificity are not really welcomed in French theater or not. This is we are seen as folkloric things, but not theater. And it's difficult because we are still fighting to say we have a specific voice, and it's why not a French specific voice? And we want to write about these stories, these specific stories, because we have a story with France, and as friends don't really want to hear too loud about this slavery story or colonial stuff. We don't have talk about that. And it's for certain playwrights or novelists, it's a fight. We fight for that, just to say a word, so to not to be in silence, but to say a word. It's difficult for us.
Yeah, I mean, I think I think it's changing now, but I certainly think that being Black when I was growing up was this very one thing. So if you're Black, you have to know about this kind of music, and you have to eat this kind of food, and you have to have this particular history. And and I know for me, I actually had to learn it because it wasn't in my family, so I had to kind of like, oh yeah, I totally know what jazz is about, even though, and I know what like the South is about, even though I didn't. So I was sort of acting on a certain level, because I didn't want to. I just think that it used to be that if you were Caribbean and you distinguished yourself, it was perceived as, oh, you think you're actually better than us, or something like that. You're trying to be different.
Absolutely,
like,
that was it.
In fact, it's like, well, no, I'm just trying to tell you, we just don't eat that food in my family. Like, we don't talk that way. I don't know. I don't know why, but my Black is not actually the same as your Black, even though we're both Black. So, yeah, I think it's really hard.
Yeah.
And I think there's a benefit to being in New York, which is why I keep on coming back here. I was born here, but I keep coming back here because there is a diverse community, and everybody's claiming their ethnic truth. And I've lived in LA, and you don't find Haitian food, and you got to struggle to find Jamaican food. Forget about, you might not find any other cultural cuisine in some parts. And I've been to the South, and all of America is not owning the ethnic specificity. But if you're going to be in New York, why not start the trend? You know what I mean?
Do you think that theater is actually a little bit behind in terms of representation and diverse forms of representation than film even? Just when I think about the kind of theater that I'm seeing right now, and the kind of conversations that I hear in the theater community, it's very much privileges Black American stories or Nigerian stories like African stories, but it's never, oh, you're Caribbean, great. So I think there's a kind of flattening that happens when programming starts. Oh, we need a Black voice, but actually it needs to be this very specific Black voice that people can recognize and people understand. And we're not willing to deal with this story, like about Jamaica, because again, Jamaicans, at least in my experience of theater, are like a joke.
Yeah. Can we talk? Yeah, let's talk about this idea of representation. Like, what roles are available to Caribbean women? I want to say, and now like Caribbean women players, Caribbean women actors. Like, what kind of roles are we seeing available for them, and what kind of representation do we see on stages and screens? If anybody wants to respond to that, and then how is your work pushing against that in any way?
I mean, the one person who I was sort of like, wow, she's so amazing growing up that I knew of was Grace Jones. She was like the only Jamaican who was anybody, in my view, of like, yeah. And since then I'm like, I don't even know who the Jamaicans are.
Romola, I think I want you to jump in on this one.
I don't know that we have any standout figures like Grace Jones, like since her. When I think about how women are represented in the stories, in the films, I think, especially for the films that are made by women, the stories are nuanced, the characters are well developed. The stories they run the gamut from, there's a filmmaker in Barbados who made a film about a woman who is queer, but a part of the spiritual Baptist movement. And then how does she's like having this internal battle with wanting to be with another woman, but can't because of her religion. So it's like, that's an example of a film. Then there's another woman from Trinidad who made a film about her relationship with her father. And, you know, learning about him as a kid and growing up with him and then him passing and how she actually dealt with that entire process. So that's another film. There's another woman in Trinidad again who is interested in preserving, like, there is French Creole spoken in Trinidad. And she's interested in preserving that. So she shot a whole film about a relative of hers who is like this old guy. He makes his own coffee. Like, he literally has coffee trees in his backyard, and he picks them and he dries them and then he grinds them and then he puts them in the pot and he makes coffee. She made a film about that. It was all in Creole as her attempt, you know, of preserving the language. So it's like we're doing everything. We're doing it all, and the representation, the types of stories we tell, you know, just come from what our interests are. And I think more and more women are finding their voices and wanting to share those stories.
Yeah. So it looks like film is what we aspire to. Caribbean film is what we're aspiring to.
Yeah.
Well, in regards to how the Caribbean woman is portrayed in film and television in America, there was an indie film featuring Garcelle Beauvais. She played a Haitian mother and a woman struggling as a single parent, and it was a textured character. The film was named after the lead character, which was the daughter. I recently went through the experience of being cast in a Netflix project as a Haitian mother, and they were adamant about casting Haitian people in the Haitian roles to speak the language. And so I feel that there is an awareness that you have to honor these unique characters with people who can actually convey the culture. And so things are changing. Yeah. And each producer, each writer, each creative team that recognizes you can't do a blank stroke of what a Caribbean is. You have to say Haitian and stick to Haitian, and hire someone who knows how to do the accent and speak the language. And if you're going to say Trini, you have to find a Trini, or someone who honors a Trini accent, not just some person who can do a derivation and butchers that culture's specificity. So there is hope, absolutely. You just have to aspire to it and create the world where people are seeing you've got to be specific. Yeah.
But meanwhile, I recently had a production of one of my plays that I didn't produce. It was like a theater produced it, and I had a character, two characters that were Jamaican in it, and one was an older. She's like a grandmother character. She's a ghost, actually. She's a duppy. And she comes and she's haunting her granddaughter, and she's like, you need to quit this job, basically, because her granddaughter is like a maid for an Upper East Side family. So so in the end of the play, there is a moment where the grandmother is on stage alone, and she's talking to the audience because she's the only one, because she's not alive, who can like break the fourth wall and talk to the audience. And she's telling this very solemn sort of story of her life. It's a quiet moment. And the director could not resist underlaying her monologue with like this vague kind of Caribbean sort of music that was not in the script. It was just like, oh, we're gonna put music here. And had her dance all of a sudden, which is not in the script either. And I kept sort of bringing it up like, I just don't understand why she's dancing here. Like, what's happening? What is this moment where she's dancing? And this is not Jamaican music also. I just don't understand what's happening. And she was like, you don't like it? I love it. And so it was like kind of this battle where I was dealing with, and they were nice, but I was dealing with their own kind of perceptions of what being Caribbean is. And so they could not resist making it this kind of heartwarming, sort of weird calypso kind of thing, and having her dance and do this thing when actually the moment was not that at all, and it made her into a stereotype as opposed to a real person that you would actually take seriously. So as I said, I think theater has a ways to go. We're not there yet. In terms
Well,
of
we
theater.
got to be careful about who's producing the work, and you know, it's hard. It's hard.
It is
when
hard,
You want to get
yeah.
it produced, and they
it's
don't.
so hard
Yeah.
because it's very easy to be cast as that black woman who's difficult, and so you're trying to like, you know, okay, it's all of us, and it's a communal effort, and we're like, and I get that, and I want you to be able to create, and also, it wasn't a thing where it was like they just paid me to like produce this play, so. Who am I to be like, no, you can't produce my play and don't pay me anymore. So it's just like one of those negotiations where you're trying to kind of meet the needs of the moment. Where okay, you're nice people. I understand what's happening here. I want to be a part of the team. However, I also want to remain. I want my story to remain my story, and I want it to have integrity. So they're just, you have to be brave enough to actually have those. I actually didn't even win that battle. They just like kept me, they just turned it down. And I was like, I just feel like it's so busy, this moment, there's so much happening. And I just want it to be quieter. And so they turned the music down.
Yeah.
So they weren't like hearing me, but I tried to.
But it sounds like the kind of, they basically put jobs, in a sense, jobs on this Caribbean female character, right? They have to be heartwarming, they have to dance, they have to perform for us, like all of these jobs
To
that
hear the sounds of the waves.
Exactly,
So
yeah.
everyone knows that she's from
so
the
it's
island.
like this double, this like exotification of
Yeah.
this woman and all of these like things. She has to make us feel good. Like that's her role, basically.
And it's also a conversation of the woman's role in theater,
Right.
right? Should we just
Wider.
be quiet
Yeah.
and just be grateful?
Mm-hmm. Daniele, I feel like I want you to jump in on this because in our conversation we talked a little bit about how you started writing work because of an absence that you were seeing in theater in Martinique for women's roles.
Yes, and I raised in France, and the only black model I have is what I was seeing on TV, and that it was African Americans, and these were my first model, but there were not models who are close to me, and that's also why I decided to write stories to represent also women or my society or my specific issues. And I forgot your question.
No, yeah, I remember in our conversation separately that we talked about the last few plays that you wrote because you felt that you weren't hearing women's voices in theater in Martinique.
Yeah. Yes, we have a big writer in Martinique, is Aimé Césaire. Aimé Césaire wrote a lot of plays, some plays, but not really a lot of women characters, not very strong women characters. And Edouard Glissant also, I don't really have souvenir of a big, strong women characters. Perhaps in contemporary theater there are more female characters, like in the Luc Saint-Éloi plays we have women, and yes, I think that there are specific stories, specific things that perhaps only women can tell, and that's why also I decided to I don't know if I decided it was like that. I had to write down certain stories, and I wanted also to represent, like in my last play, La Diablesse, strong women, because when we see women, there are problems. They are weak. They have social problems or violence problem, and I wanted to write down this play because for me La Diablesse is a sort of hero, female superhero, Caribbean superhero. That was I wanted to write it down because it's based about a legend in the Caribbean, but not only. And it's about magic creator, female creature who is very seducing. And when you are a man, be careful because she's so seducing that she will take you in the woods. And the morning after, the day after, you could be lost or mad or dead. And this is about, this came to me about from oral tradition, from my grandmother or people. And I was asking my young fellows, female fellows, about La Diablesse. Do you know La Diablesse? And nobody knows about La Diablesse. So I decided also to write it down to transmettre, to convey this tradition, oral tradition, about that strong, magical woman who is in a heritage, and oral heritage. And I wanted to show them a woman who are like them and who is strong and not a broke woman. And and I wanted to talk about men also, and my vision of certain male in our society, and a certain education they give to male to be seducing women and collecting women and take women, the bodies of women. And I wanted to create this hero to be strong enough to say to the men, stop. No, my body is not yours. I decide what I decide for my body. You don't take my body like that. And this character was important for me, for my personal story, but also to convey this tradition about this woman, and also because we are in a modern society where all young people are on their phones and they don't really have nowhere they can receive their story or their heritage. No, on the TV, they don't have les moyens c'est compliqué. Les moyens de recevoir, the mean to receive their oral heritage, who is disappearing. And it was important for me to write down this story.
Yeah.
We'll discover this tomorrow night.
So basically, reaching into our past to find strong models that we could follow, that our younger generation can look up to, to talk about that empowerment of women.
Yeah.
So I think now we might open it up to the audience for questions or comments. Yeah. I might borrow somebody's mic.
Wait.
I am happy to be here, and I found out at the last minute, though I am in New York, so it's difficult for us to really get together, but you know, this is so important, what we're doing here today. I wanted to just let you know that St. Lucia, we know about La Diablesse also. Yes, I know that. So it cuts across the stories. We might have different names for the characters, but the essence of the character, Jamaica has the version, there's Nani, who was a real person, so all of that. So we do have the stories, so you know, it's interesting that this is so passionate for you and so important to you. And likewise, everyone's trying to get all those stories across, but at the end of the day, the specific is important, but the universal side of it, because we all can relate as humans, and the other people who are not specific Caribbean or who are not Black, they need to understand our story also, so we need to bear that in mind. So I appreciate that we're collaborating so the stories can get wider audiences and bigger. So thanks for this opportunity to be here.
Anybody else? Yes.
Yes, in fact, I have one question for Daniele. When you work, I guess your work has been presented in Martinique, or in Guadeloupe as well. What was the impact on the audience? I mean, if you are speaking of domestic violence or the position of women in Guadeloupe, so how was it received? What was the reaction of the audience? The impact?
Very often, people tell me that I write necessary plays. There are necessary subjects, issues to write down, because there are some play about violence, but I don't know. There are a lot of women who come to and weep in my arms after that, or women who write down some words for me that are telling me, thank you for talking for us. I'm ému, and I'm really moved about that, because I discovered that my personal work, that is the personal vision, can touch a lot of women, and it's a sort of voice of several women, and that issues are very important for hurricanes about incest, but also when I presented La Diablesse, women tell me also, thank you for us, because in fact they felt very empowered and strong and fier, very proud to be what they are.
What questions? Pierre?
This is a question that has to do with production, and something that I've been thinking about all the time, that I've been working on French theater and Francophone theater and American theater, and where the money comes from, and why that might have some difficulty, make things more difficult for Danielle, for example, to get her work done. Because in France, including in Guadeloupe and Martinique, for the most part, theater is subsidized by the government. So, of course, everyone loves this, right? Because the government believes in arts. It's France, so art is great, and so on and so forth. But it means that work that's outside the mainstream doesn't get produced very often. And people don't have the habit. You've all gone out and looked for money, right? You've gone and found money, and you've made it happen. But there isn't a kind of culture of doing that, I think, in the Francophone world, in the Francophone sphere. And I'm just pointing that out, because where do you get produced, Danielle?
Yeah, my work was produced by the French, alors le bureau de la DRAC en Martinique, le bureau du ministère, the Direction of Culture, there are affairs, in regional Direction of Cultural Affairs. And they are obligés. They have to produce my work, because we are not a lot in companies, and I discuss a lot with them pour les convaincre, to convince that it's important to do it.
But in France itself.
But in France, it's not the same thing. I think Luc can talk about that. In France, it's not the same thing. I live in Martinique and I create in Martinique. It's not the same thing that in France. In France, it's very, very, very hard. We have to find money other ways.
I mean, and I'll add that living in New York, even though technically, well, that arts are subsidized by, I guess we'll call them czars, people who have money and doing very specific stories like the rest of us are, who are in New York, it's the same thing. So, yeah, just pointing that out.
My name is Vanessa. I'm originally from French Guiana. I used to work with Nicole from the French Embassy, and we invited Danielle in Miami, so I know her play Hurricane, which is very strong. I just wanted to make a brief comment, actually, on about the Caribbean community, because right now I'm working on another project which is more on immigrants. And it happens that actually the Caribbean community, which probably some people or maybe all of you know, but is the second largest community after the Asian one in New York, which means after Chinese, Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, and so on. So it's the second largest community in New York, and I feel in terms of opportunities, this is huge, and we have to kind of seize this opportunity and get together, as you said, and work as a network. It's not always easy, but I think many different actions and initiatives have been taken in that sense. Probably more in visual arts. There have been a couple of exhibitions in that sense, less on theater. So I'm really glad this is happening. So I think this is, in terms of impact and outreach and audience, this is quite significant, and I think we can build on that.
But I think you need to recognize that the Caribbean community doesn't feel that theater serves their interest. So first you have to tell them that there is theater that will interest them. And that hasn't been the case in New York or anywhere else in America.
Yeah, I think it's really tricky when you talk about, it's not even so much Caribbean communities as immigrant communities, right?
Immigrant communities.
Generally speaking, from my experience, immigrants are all about like working and like surviving and assimilating and not really sticking out, and particularly, at least when I was growing up, and I mean that's shifting now. I think you're right. I think there is a wealth of opportunity, but I guess the questions that we need to continue to ask are, well, how do you present a case to various communities and say, no, this is actually for you. These are stories that were made specifically for you, that has some value. So you know, maybe you'd be willing to pay $10 or whatever it is to like come see something, rather than saving that money for groceries or saving that money for, you know, like I think it's really, really challenging. I mean, when I think about the Asian, I only know of one Asian theater, the Mai Rep, or I think it's the Mai Theater Company. That's the one I know. Oh yeah, I forgot about Pan Asian. I don't know of a Caribbean theater company in New York. Oh yeah,
Conchel Productions, me.
Yeah, from last year. So this is new.
So it's very new and it's very grassroots. So last year, in preparation for Hear Her Call, I went to senior centers. I contacted high schools. And so this year, I'm going to be working on getting volunteers, because we're being hosted by York College. The Milton G. Basin Performing Arts Center is co-presenting our festival. So I'm going to be looking for volunteers to go into the community, to speak to the community, to speak to high school students, to encourage them to come, because one of the most passionate members of our audience were a group of high school students from a neighboring, from Hillcrest High School, which is my alma mater. Oops, I put it out there. And they were pumped. They were like shouting and applauding, and they were active participants in the post-show discussion, because they were excited that, oh my gosh, that's my story. That's exactly how my mother talks to me. That's what it's like in my household, because we had two pieces about, you know, the Caribbean American child and the Caribbean parent, and the battle for power and what's the true way to be. So it's very grassroots.
Yeah, but I'd also add that there is actually a very long history of Caribbean American theater. Unfortunately, though, it tends to happen in small communities, and so that their names don't get to carry on past the community that birthed them.
Rata Productions,
Nandi Kay, who is going to moderate one of the panel discussions this evening, E. Wayne McDonald, who's been doing theater in New York, I don't know, maybe over 30 years.
Liberation Theater is headed by a Jamaican-American woman, Sandra E. Daly.
There we go. Yeah, and so there's actually quite a lot. Yeah, there's a long history. Cheryl Byron is also another name that's very prominent in the Caribbean American community in terms of performance and theater and music and dance.
And there's actually the Caribbean American Theater in Queens.
There you go.
They've been around a very, very long time.
So there is a lot. It's just that, again, opportunities like these don't happen very often. And so unless you're in the small community that births it and the slightly larger community that attends those events, the names don't get to carry on. So thank you for being here. Last question.
Thank you all for sharing thus far. I'm interested in these narratives and what you had mentioned earlier about being a role model and how, and to kind of also segue to Candace's question on preservation of your work in how you would like to be archived. How do you imagine your contributions that you've made thus far and that you intend to make going forward? What is the unique way you want your work to be disseminated beyond yourself, through an institution, through independently? How do you want to library yourself for those going forward?
I mean, I definitely think it's important.
We keep this last comment brief because we have to transition soon.
Okay, I definitely think it's important for plays to be published because that gives colleges an opportunity to buy them and disseminate them to their students. I think that plays should be studied the same way other forms of literature are studied, so people should write papers about plays and give them that kind of academic credibility. Not to say that that's the be-all, end-all, but I find it helpful. I also write children's theater sometimes, and I think it's really great to get them while they're young and get them excited about theater. So reaching younger audiences to me is like a great way to continue the work.
And there are theater journals. I've had one of my pieces published in a theater journal, and another piece is going to be published in the theater journal. So they're journals for the academic world. It's out there. You just have to decide to find it.
Yeah.
You know.
Romola, you want to talk briefly?
Yeah. You know, there's for film specifically, I don't believe that there's an archive for Caribbean films. I've been speaking to a filmmaker who made a film in Guyana, I don't know, in the 70s. It's still on 16 millimeter. We showed it at BAM on the 16 millimeter because they have one theater with that capability. But her first question to me when we spoke about showing the film is there an archive? Like, what can I'm moving on, where can I leave my work? Where it will be kept intact and so it can be enjoyed, and we don't have one. So, you know, that is a huge gap that we need to sort of work on.
I mean, I think that's the problem of theater in general, right? Because it's like this ephemeral thing, you know, it's this live event, so how do you archive it? Yeah. It's a good question. Beyond publication, which is not actually the same, like reading something is not the same experience of, you know, seeing something and hearing something, but.
Danielle, you want to say any last quick words?
None of my plays are published. So for me, the first thing is to publish them. This one will be, and in English, and the other play, Hurricanes, will be traduced in Czech. Translated in Czech. In fact, the first audiences that are interested in my work are foreign audiences and the publishers, and it's good for me to exchange about my work here in America and in other countries of Europe is like that.
Also, New Play Exchange, it's a website where writers can get their work posted on that site, and there's also opportunities to get published because there are calls from different publishers for new works. They focus on new works, so just go to newplayexchange.org, and it's a membership organization, but they were at TCG this summer, and they're doing great things for new writers, and they do have a lot of Caribbean American writers' work. There was actually an article about Caribbean American writers.
Nice. I think we're going to wrap it up. Last question. Okay, go.
That wasn't a question, it's a comment on publishing. There's
Also the Caribbean. Someone get her a mic. Excuse me. Sorry. Thank you.
So the Caribbean Writer still exists. They're published at the University of Virgin Islands, and it's been around maybe 30, 35 years now, the Caribbean Writer, which is it comes out yearly publication, and it has poetry, short stories, and theater plays as well, published in the magazine or in the book, in the journal. And then Opal Palmer Adisa, who is a writer out of Jamaica, has an online magazine called Interviewing the Caribbean. Recently, maybe it's about 3 years old, and that's another opportunity for publishing. And lastly, a comment about play or Caribbean theater being produced here in New York. Don't forget, Puerto Rican theater is majorly produced here, and a lot of times when conversations about the Caribbean happen, Puerto Rico is left out of that conversation. Either by them, they exclude themselves, or we exclude the non-Puerto Rican Caribbean, exclude Puerto Rico in our conversations about what is Caribbean.
Thank you for that. Yeah, that's true. I think on that note, we're going to end. I just want to do a brief bio read of each of the panelists, just to have that on record before we leave. Magali is a first-generation Haitian-American actress, playwright, director, producer, who was born in Brooklyn, New York. In 2018, she became the founder and artistic director of Conch Shell Productions. Romola O. Lucas is an attorney and avid Caribbean indie film enthusiast of Guyanese heritage, who resides in Brooklyn, New York. She's a founder and executive director of Caribbean Film Academy, a New York-based nonprofit created to share Caribbean films. And Amina Henry. Her recent productions include The Animals, Ducklings, Hunter John and Jane, and The Johnsons at Jack. And she's a playwright and educator. All right. And Daniele Francisque, of course, who's here, our honored guest. You will see her work, Laja Bless, tomorrow at 8 p.m. Yes? Thank you very much, everyone. We're going to transition. Yes. The next thing will start at 4 p.m. Thank you, guys. Sorry, I kind of like 6 vibes in the beginning, but y'all like... Oh, yeah. Hey, how are Yeah, I am back and forth. Like I grew up there and then came here. I think both of them in the middle, they were born here. So they were.
Good. Are you staying for the morning? I'm directing you. Yeah. At 4, yeah. So, got it. And they would talk to me. And more shit for coming today. But it was
Caribbean, you know what I mean? I knew Danielle would kind of pull that down. So in Paris, it's like I wanted to have it represent the identity of the and it's complex. Yeah.
I'm good. How are you? Is it good? Good to see you here. This one, the one that's coming up next. Are you hanging out? Yeah. Well, you know,
aux États-Unis, en Tchécoslovaquie, on va se dire, mais c'est qui la vieille Francis?
Tu perds trop d'énergie à ce moment.
Elle est française. Ah bon, elle est française. Elle a été avant d'être jouée en France. Après, on va commencer à s'apprendre. C'est ma stratégie. C'est le détour, tant pis. C'est la stratégie d'être dans encore plus sur
arts magic crowd. So they've already seen, they have access to more people who are also pioneering it. So it's not like this apologetic relationship to like the Caribbean side of themselves. So it's like it's different. And so si je dis ça, des Français qui ont attaqué, grew up like in the 80s, it's different than the world.
ça diffère.
In a way, yeah.
Non, mais c'est super d'avoir de voir qu'il y a plusieurs personnes qui sont la diaspora caribéenne.
Ah, salut! How are you? Comment ça va? Oh, my
Thank you so much. Sorry, I'm going to It's okay, y'all.
Alors, tu viens de Paris? Ah, je continue, ok, d'accord. Ah, ok, d'accord. Ah, pardon. Ah, ok, d'accord. Américain, en fait. Ouais, moi, je suis né à Trinidad, j'ai grandi à Trinidad. Ça fait 15 ans que je suis là. Ouais, c'est moi qui ai dirigé. Ça va beaucoup faire. Voilà, exactement. Ah, merci. Voilà. Ouais, c'est sûr. Ah ouais, c'est bien. Ah, ok, d'accord, ouais, c'est bien. Là, c'est à New York. C'est un peu de oh, ouais, c'est
I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that it's interesting that it's all back right now. Back to back. I mean, yeah.
Ah oui, ça s'est bien passé, on a fait des répétitions. Alors c'est simple, on a fait.